God, we thank you for this day and this opportunity. We gather around here mindful of your prayer when you've reminded us that your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Today, you've presented to us people who are committed to exacting your prayer. Their witness and their wisdom has demonstrated both in their local practice their commitment to create heaven on earth for people who have not. Pray now that your spirit would make itself manifest, and all those who listen will be inspired for the work yet to come. It's in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Matthews. I'm the pastor of the historic Mckinley United Methodist Church in the beautiful city of Dayton, Ohio. We bring you greetings from our resident bishop, Gregory Von Palmer. We bring you greetings from our district superintendent, Dr. Jocelyn Marie Roper. And on behalf of our community partners, our friends, our staff, and our church leaders, we ask that if you're watching this broadcast, we celebrate the fact that this will be a lively discussion that pushes the conversation of humanity forward. Here is something that I will make as a full disclaimer. This is not a direct endorsement of anyone, but this is a hearty support of my dear friend. I stay here not in the pulpit, but on a side microphone letting you know that I'm a firm believer in the vision that's been exacted by this wonderful pair, but I'm also here as a private citizen looking forward to what God has in store for us today. And what we will begin with is something very, very important. The Innocence Project. It is something that has inspired and has ripple effects all over the world. Let's look, and I'll come right back.
When people think of OIP, they think of the people we've freed from prison.
Free Clarence now! Free Clarence now!
He's been exonerated. They dropped all the charges, and he's getting out late this afternoon.
God bless all of you guys. You guys are amazing.
What a lot of people don't realize is that from the very beginning, we've been pushing the boundaries of reforming the criminal justice system.
All we're doing is seeking to get the DNA evidence. And then you have to get the court or the prosecutor to agree to let you test it. Most of the time, they won't let you do that.
Things just don't happen immediately. You've got to really sort of prime the pump, and you've got to set the stage. When I would meet with a representative or a senator and say, we need to change the way that police show pictures to eyewitnesses. We need a record of what's happening in that interrogation room. Preserving DNA so the police can't just say, oh, we threw it away after trial. Literally, I got looked at like I had 3 heads. A lot of times people just didn't even understand the need for it. Reforming the criminal justice system, making it more fair, benefits people beyond wrongful convictions. If you're changing the attitude in a police department, if you're changing the way they think about their job, not only is it going to decrease the chance that they're going to go after somebody innocent, it's going to change the way they're interacting with people in the public. In 2007, we began working on an omnibus bill that had the entire sort of national reform package in one bill called Senate Bill 77. I decided to come back with Robert and Clarence.
Take me along, okay, and share my story about what happened. And then doors start opening up. People start listening.
Robert McClendon's conviction is overturned by DNA.
I believe that people will connect with you if you're being honest. And people will connect with you if you're coming from a place of being real and emotional, if you're going through something.
We'd end up having a 45-minute conversation where they would really want to hear what Clarence or Robert had to say.
Doing life in prison for something you didn't do is like being in the ocean without a life support.
And I'd walk out of there and they'd say, well, you have my vote. Governor Strickland signed it in 2010.
This is a good day for Ohio. It's a good day for justice. Thank you to Mark Godsey, not only for your involvement with this effort, Mark, but for what the Innocent Project has done across the country.
Really, honestly, it's because of Clarence and Robert.
Robert McClendon, thank you, Robert, for being here. We appreciate the time you've taken. Clarence, thank you, Clarence, for being here.
Legislators at the time called Senate Bill 77 the most significant piece of criminal justice legislation in this state in a century, and I believe that's true.
About a month ago, I saw something that was on the cover of the New York Times, It was the beginning of an exodus from the Ukraine. Clearly, you've heard about the 3.6 million resettled people who are trying to find and gain their freedom. And yet, as these people were exiting, there was a cracked bridge under which pieces of rubble you could see were beginning to spiral down and fall on their head. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, not just the immediacy by which our government began to make sure that they had humanitarian aid and even weapons, but what struck me was, what about the rubble on the heads of the kids in Dayton? Today, they have parents as well who are experiencing what it feels like to be in the fourth poorest city in America. We need a plan to think about those persons who are coming back from those situations. Today, we will hear some powerful, powerful testimonies along with the co-founder of the Innocent Project as we begin to very carefully, not methodically, listen to leadership that is inspired, informed, and intelligent. I have a beautiful panel of one Robert McClendon, who just walked in like the celebrity that he is. Hey man, you bad. Them glasses is bad, brother. I need those on Sunday morning. And then we'll hear from Barbara Freeman. We'll hear from Mayor Cranley and his wonderful running mate, Senator Teresa Federer. Robert has spent 17 years in prison for a rape and kidnapping he didn't commit. He maintained his innocence all along. Then the Ohio Innocent Project got involved. They used DNA to prove that another man was responsible for that crime. We're going to ask Robert a couple questions and just kind of hear from him. Robert, why don't you introduce ourselves to you? If you get a chance, not only look out to the people who are in front of you, and you can also look at that camera right there. You'll be talking to the whole state.
Hi, my name is Robert McClendon, and first I'm glad to be here. And I was convicted of kidnapping and rape, and I was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison.
Can you tell us, what was it like to be falsely accused and tried for crimes you didn't commit?
It's the worst thing that could happen to anyone. I think, for me, the worst thing that ever happened in my life was being wrongly accused of something that I never did and spending 15 years in prison. And the happiest, most glorious thing that ever happened to me is when the Ohio Innocent Project got involved in my case and freed me.
Brother, I mean, we hear that and we find it impactful, but talk to us today about what did you do and how did you survive spiritually, emotionally, all those years?
Well, if we're in prison, you actually lose everything but faith and hope. That's what got me through. God helped me through. We're here in church. Sometime, when I'm in other places, I say I don't want to take people to church, but now I can because I'm in church. How about that?
Amen.
So I actually, I learned a lot about God, about praying, and about my faith. Because we talk about God all the time, but people pray for, like, houses and cars and jobs. It's nothing like praying for something like your life, something that you really, really lost, like you're on your deathbed. That's when prayer really works. When your freedom been denied you, that's what you pray for. You don't pray for cars and things, stuff like that. So I also learned that God doesn't open one door. You have to be patient. It opens a series of doors. And the doors was Columbus Dispatch and Ohio Innocent Project for me.
You talked a little bit about, and you were very gracious in displaying your gratitude towards the Innocence Project. Tell us a little bit more about how you connected. How did that unfold? Can you talk a little bit in more detail about that relationship?
Yes. I think the Innocent Project has been the most important thing in my life because not only did it free me, but it opened up a lot of doors in terms of relationships with people that I would never have had before. My auxiliary brothers and sisters are like really sisters and brothers. The attorneys and the students involved in the Innocent Project, they just don't get you out and just say, hey, hello, goodbye. They're with you. They help guys transition into society, you know. And it's just ongoing. And my best friend in the Innocent Project is that guy right there named Dean Gillespie. We've been named the peanut butter and jelly of the Innocent Project.
I'm feeling a little uncomfortable in church, but I'm gonna let you run with it. I'm feeling a little comfortable. I'm gonna let you run with that.
But we're friends and brothers, and it's real because sometime when you get out of prison and you're surrounded by a whole lot of people, family and friends, and sometimes people's not always your family, and people's always not your friends.
That's right.
There's hidden agendas there. But with the Ohio Innocent Project and the relationships that I formed, there's no fakeness, there's no phoniness. Everybody is real, everybody gets it. It's a good place to be.
I was doing some research about you and your testimony and your case. What I was most struck by was they said while you were waiting for the DNA results, you had a poem that you wrote that kind of caught traction. Have you memorized the poem? If so, can I put you on the spot? Can you talk about how that poem came to be? Can you talk to us a little bit about it and share it with us?
I was waiting for the second DNA test to come back because when the first DNA test came back from the Ohio Innocent Project, it showed that I did not do it. But the state wanted to do their own DNA test, which I just totally went crazy because it kept me in jail for an extra week and a half. And my Aunt Martha, she said, don't you worry about that. You just cool your heels and just stay there because it's going to be a blessing. So I asked my auntie, how is it going to be a blessing when I got to stay in jail for an extra week and a half? And she said, you just wait and see. So the blessing was when the result came back, it came back with a hit with a known suspect. Okay, so while I was waiting for the results, I wrote a poem entitled Hello Truth. I think everybody has had their journey with the truth in one way or another. I hope that as I say this poem, that everyone can relate to it in one way or another.
Take your time.
You ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hello, truth. That's it? That's the poem.
Hello. I am the truth.
No, I'm just kidding.
If you don't have no sense of humor, you ain't got no sense at all. That's right. That's right.
Okay. Hello, truth. You've been there all the time, but some people don't want to see you. Some people don't want to believe you. Hello, truth. We fight for you. We fought because of you. But there are those who sleep in the lie, those who live with the lie. Hello, truth. They played hide and seek with you and the proof. But when surrounded by lies and deceit, no wonder it took so long to find you. Hello, truth. With God's armor, you come to dress me. I knew in time you would bless me. Hello, truth.
Amen.
There's a place in Scripture where it says that you are fearlessly and wonderfully made. I know that right well. We don't have to go to Malaysia or India. We don't have to go overseas to experience the grips of human trafficking. You don't have to go outside of our community to know that not only is it real, but it's ravaging families to 2 and 3 generations. Today, I offered that particular scripture because Barbara Freeman comes to talk to us a little bit about what it meant to be lost in the grips of human trafficking beginning at the age of 16 years old. Not only had she found her way spiraling out of control, but it was compounded by drug addiction. And yet, there was a police officer that began to instill her, perhaps, with some of the words her mother and her grandmother taught her all along. And from there, she became a graduate of Franklin County's Catch Court. And now, she runs the Freeman Project that provides housing and counseling for other survivors. Indeed, as we learned this morning, she is a Shira. Look at 1 Chronicles, 7th chapter. She is a builder of cities. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Barbara Freeman a round of applause.
Thank you.
Now, other than the fact that you live in Ohio and you like the Alabama football team, we'll talk about that afterwards. I'm not trying to embarrass you in front of everybody. Roll Tide, I guess. But tell us about Catch Court. What is it? How does it work?
Catch Court is a program. Catch stands for Changing Actions to Change Habits. It's a program when I first came at grips that I was done with the life. The attorney that was assigned to me was steady telling me, no, they want to send you, either they want you to do jail time or want to send you to prison. And I'm like, no, go back. I sent them back in there probably 6 times. And I said, I'm not accepting their deal. God has something else in store for me. And so a young lady named Andrea Boxel came about and said that there was a program coming along called, they didn't even have a name for the program yet, but I was one of the first participants. It was 3 of us, actually. The program was basically designed for women that were found to be of human trafficking. And, no longer was the terms being set for prostitution because Honorable Judge Herbert, he seen something in a woman. She was standing up on the wall, and he asked her, what happened to you? And he said, who did this to you? And she said, my pimp. And he said, well, where's he at? And she said, they didn't arrest him, they arrested me. So he went on to start this program called the Catch Program. Catch Program was the first time that I've ever felt like I didn't mind coming to court and not be in trouble. And it was a place where I felt safe, and it was a place where I can go every Thursday. It was a program that was designed to teach us about healthy relationships, healthy boundaries, just teach us about life and help us to know what it is to live basically a normal life, to be accepted and have unconditional love without a price. I love this program. Me and Judge Herbert is like this, and I mean, he says all the time, like, Barb, I couldn't have did this without you, because he really didn't know how to impact women, and like I told him, like, you're not going to save everybody, but if you can just save one person, it'll make all the difference. I said, you're saving me, so along with the Catch Program comes Amethyst, and that part is the housing part. So we come to Catch every Thursday for an hour and 45 minutes where we get to talk about our life. We get to talk about things that are baffling us. We get to talk about those stumbling blocks that are in the way that's stopping us from moving forward. We get to, tell our clean time, which is congratulated. We get to see other ladies that are wanting to come into the program, that comes into the courtroom with handcuffs, and we're able to give them something real. We're able to show them, like, this is better over here on this side, and that you can do this because I can. You know, faith without works is dead. You know, we pray and we ask God to heal us and to deliver us, and he does that, but the faith without works is dead, so we had to do the work.
You hear repeatedly about the psychological damage that's done for women, particularly, and the generational effect. But when you kind of think back on your own time, what would you think that's most at risk for being trafficked, and why?
Woo, death. I'm gonna tell you what I went through was not knowing if my mother was gonna get that call or that knock on that door to say that my body was found in a dumpster, or to say that my body parts was cut up and put in a bucket. To not know if, you know, you would catch a disease out there that would kill you. To not know if you was going to be beaten to death. I was kicked in my head 16 times with steel-toe boots, and they found my body in the bushes. You know, I was chained up in basements, you know, kidnapped, you know, right in Columbus, Ohio. You know, everything that I went through, you know. But it take a part of you because, you know, today I'm so strong about myself. Like, I'm a strong black woman, you know, and I stand strong on that because everything was taken from me at the age of 16. I just been free from that life. It'll be 13 years, April the 8th, you know. So just the fact that somebody controlling your life, somebody taking everything from you, you know, you don't get to have those dreams as a little girl, and you don't get to, you know, you don't get to do all those things that you've imagined, and, you know, you don't get to be successful, and you don't get, you know, and when you get to the age, I'm 50 years old now. So when did I get sober? Do the math, because I ain't, you know what I'm saying, them kicks in my head probably don't mess me up. But listen, I know that, yeah, it's been hard for me to put my life back together. It's been so hard. One thing about Catch Court that I meant to say is, once you go through the program for 2 years, they expunge and seal your record. It's done.
Wow.
That's the best thing that could have ever happened for me. I know when I was going through what I was going through, I know God was setting the path for me. You know, you talk about them doors. I know that he had them doors, you know, it's like the 7 seals. You know what I'm saying? Like, he had them doors ready to be open, you know, because he said, as long as you do the work, I'll lead the way, you know, and he's done that. But it's been hard sometimes, especially in relationships, you know, out here in the workforce. You know, I really don't have to prove myself in the workforce, because I got somebody like Teresa. I'd be like, write them letters, you know, like, you know, my godfather, Councilman McGrady, they write me the letters. Like, they wrote me the letters for Nationwide Children's Hospital, you know, and they was like, oh, we don't want nobody but her. We know that if we got these two, you know, like, oh, she the deal, you know. So it's hard in that factor of, especially for a woman. Human trafficking don't only happen with a woman, it also happen with a man too. But it's hard getting that life back. Stereotyping, judgment, you know, I don't care how you judge me today. I know who I am. I'm confident in who I am, the woman that I am. And I know that if I wasn't under the influence of those drugs and slanged into that lifestyle, I wouldn't have done none of the things that I did.
So we have a program here at McKinley called Girls Emerging to Maturity. Actually got 3 of them sitting up there now. We had Tia Payne is a remarkable young woman that quit a job at Citibank because she was passionate about doing some of the work that you're committed to, not just with group homes. But if you could look in that camera and tell the people across the state, what can Ohio do to help prevent human sexual trafficking?
I would say get involved. I would say, you know, even in the families, in the churches, in the community, stop pushing this matter under the rug. Quit sweeping it under the rug. It is existing in the homes, in society, in the churches, in the communities. It's happening. We have to get it while it's starting at early ages. You know, I would say young women, young men, speak up. Use your voices. Say what's going on. You know, vote for people like Mckinley and Teresa Fetter so that we can get tougher laws and penalties to help stop human trafficking. It's a matter it's hard, you know, because it's a continuous cycle. But I know with everybody's input and with everybody opening up resources and, you know, getting involved and getting the word out and having places for young people to go, because that's the number one thing. When I go and I speak in schools, and when I get done speaking, they're lined up all the way down the wall, and they're telling me what's going on, and it can't even be stopped in the school system because it's not something that's being educated on. We need to get education about these things in the school system, you know, and that's something that Teresa Fetter is so strongly on, you know. Young men are accused in, like, my brother right here is so falsely accused in so many ways sometimes that they like, I might as well just go ahead and do it. You know, not everybody is a criminal. You know, and not because you grow up in the wrong way makes you a bad person. If we get educated on what's going on in society today, we're better able to take a grasp at it and change it. So I would say get involved. See where these places are that are supporting human trafficking. You can go on my website, thefreemanproject.com, www.thefreemanproject.com. Get involved. See where you can volunteer. See where you can be a big sister, a big brother. You know, see where you can get involved. It's different things opened up out here. Thank you.
I think we're going to be voting for her one day, too.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. There's you hear this scripture over and over and says, where there is no vision, the people perish. You've heard that a lot, right? Yeah. There's another translation of that scripture in the Amplified Bible where it says, where there is no vision, the people run wild. And think about our state for a minute and how our state is running wild and not allowing people the opportunity to vote based on these redistricting laws. Running wild with the ravages of white supremacy that goes unchecked because no one's scared to talk about it. Running wild in such a way that our children don't have even the basic infrastructure to realize their dreams in real time. Today we have the co-founder of the Innocent Project, who happens just to be a friend of mine as well. Went to a graduate Jesuit school in Cleveland, has a degree from Harvard Law and Harvard Divinity School. I often tease him that I've never heard a white boy talk about Jesus the way John Cranley does. And yet, in his plain spokenness, there is an emerging giant of moral gravitas. That after he graduated with this deep sense of social justice, he came back and served as Cincinnati City Council, served 2 terms as a city mayor, and under John's leadership, Cincinnati became the only major city in Ohio who was once in decline, and by every certifiable factor could announce a comeback. And so now, Cincinnati's investment in Black-owned businesses are rising. The police-community relationships are not just improving, but there's documented evidence that activists in community policing are getting along together. And today, he's a candidate for governor. And so I'm going to ask you a couple questions, my dear friend. How does your run for governor relate to the work you did at the Innocent Project?
Thank you. It's great to be back at McKinley, I think for the 4th or 5th time. And I do consider you a friend, and of course I'm with friends here up on the stage. And I got to point out my friend, as Robert did, Dean Calypsy, another one of our exonerees who spent 20 years in prison for something he had nothing to do with. And I'm glad to know. Peanut butter and jelly, that's great. I just because Dean's here, I visited Dean in prison multiple times. You visited me too now. I visited Robert as well. And, you talk about having angels in your lives. And Dean's mother is one of those people. And she was the one who got us involved. And I remember, I don't know if Mark ever told you this story. Mark Gotze, the co-founder of the Innocence Project, for those of you who don't know, who still is running it. He still runs it. And he's one of my best friends, and he's one of their best friends too. But Dean's mother had us come to her house and have a fundraiser to raise money to fund, efforts to get him out of prison and the expenses. And his mother had mortgaged the home and was essentially on the verge of bankruptcy because she knew that her son was innocent and was in prison. And, this is already 10 years in, probably-ish, maybe, I don't know, around 10. And you could see in the eyes of the people that were there that they were there to humor her, but nobody thought, everyone knew Dean was innocent, but nobody thought he was coming home. And I remember driving back from that event with Mark Gotze, and I just remember Mark bawling in the car, and saying, he's innocent, and we're not going to be able to get him out. And of course, the Innocence Project never quit, but it was like literally from that backyard event to Dean's release was probably another 8 years, 8 or 9 years. Incredible. But he believed, we believed, but most importantly, he had his mother and others in his life that were pushing and never giving up. And I will say, not to be too much of a downer, there are definitely cases that we have had over the years that we are convinced that we have an innocent person, but we're unable to get the evidence necessary to prove it. A lot of times DNA evidence degrades, is thrown away, gone. And so if you had the DNA preserved, you would know definitively one way or the other, but oftentimes it's not. So it is certainly, I think, a certain sense of just being moved. When you hear something like that, you can't close your eyes, you can't ignore it. And I grew up, as Pastor Matthews pointed out, in a family that took faith very seriously. I was blessed by faith at a young age and took very seriously the callings of Jesus and the Gospels, that the true message is of liberation and to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. And that had a really big impact on me at a very young age. And we don't have time to go into all the details that Matthews heard before about some conversion experiences I had with studying and doing theater and with human rights activists, about human rights activists like Oscar Romero and others. But this sense that the true meaning of a good life would be to build a more just world is deep. And I'm always asking myself, what have I done to try to make the world a better place? The question is, how does this relate to running for governor? And you're going to hear from my amazing running mate in a minute, Teresa Fetter. But Teresa's work has been as the leader of the human traffic survivors advocate. And obviously, I've been mayor of Cincinnati, and she's been a state legislator. And so we have plenty of political accomplishments and resume issues to talk about. But what we wanted this tour to be about is the cornerstone of our moral vision. And I think about the cornerstone, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The idea that Jesus doesn't think there's such thing as an imperfect stone is one way to think about that. And he builds his church on people who are flawed and sinful and imperfect. Another way to think about it is it's thrown out by the builder, abused, tossed aside. You can't imagine two people that have been more tossed aside or abused by what humankind is capable of doing in evil than Robert and Barbara or Dean. These are folks who have suffered enormous abuse and evil. And that was caused by humans against other humans. And so while we have plans to rebuild the middle class and to legalize marijuana and to create income for the middle class, to deal with inflation and the normal things that you hear about on campaigns, we wanted the people of this state to know that the cornerstone of our values is social justice, and that we will never forget people like Robert and Dean and Barbara and others when we are doing our jobs. That we will help everyone, but we feel a special vision for those who have been mistreated. And if I'm willing to fight for Robert and Dean, I'll fight for you. And as I've said to many times, the biggest issue we're running into when we go around the state is for people to believe that it's even possible for a Democrat to win in Ohio. And we know it's going to be hard, but we've done harder things. Getting people like Robert and Dean out of prison is harder than getting a Democrat elected in Ohio. And if we can do that, we can do this campaign.
You know, one of the things that's so inspired is your biblical abiding faith in the notion of redemption. And I think when people hear that, obviously they're impacted by it because they hear in your witness, they feel it in your wisdom. But how does that become law? You know, don't mess around, get a little wonky with us. Talk about how do you streamline some of that so some of the persons exonerating innocent people, how would you go about doing that?
Teresa and I will be putting forth a comprehensive criminal justice reform package that will involve many issues. And I'll have Teresa talk more about the human trafficking issues. When it comes to wrongful convictions, the number one cause, or many causes, but the number one cause is mistaken eyewitness ID. And there are real, honest reforms that can be done on investigation, interviews, double-blind analysis, and videotaping of interviews. There are a lot of cases of people that have been freed where witnesses were abused or borderline tortured by the police to say what they ultimately said, and videotaping of those interviews is critical. It's also the case that you have all kinds of biases by police officers. I think, well, in some cases, just evil actions by officers. In Dean's case, where they just purposely framed him for something he didn't do. And making sure that we have properly funded public defenders, properly funded system throughout. Transparency doesn't solve every problem, but it solves a lot of them. So just as like I led the effort to be the first city in Ohio to get body cameras on all of my police officers, and now I even have body cameras that come on automatically, we need body cameras, essentially videotapes of a lot of the investigative elements of criminal justice. And as governor, we can require a lot of this through executive action. We can require a lot of this through licensing of law enforcement. But we can also, we will also be putting forth legislation along the same lines.
It's fantastic. Give him another round of applause. We're being kind to Senator Fetter. She is known widely across the Miami Valley area as the mother of the human trafficking movement. Having witnessed some of that, and by I'm reading it, has not just worked with countless women like Ms. Freeman, but has set in motion a conversation that people are still having where they actually see those survivors as real people. I want to ask you just a couple questions. We thank you for coming today. You said you decided to tackle human trafficking after reading an article in the Toledo Blade about victims, including little girls. What were the first steps you took to understand the significance of this trafficking issue?
Well, our community was very surprised about 17 years ago when we read above the fold of the Toledo Blade that there was a Harrisburg, Pennsylvania truck stop bust by the FBI. It was a national operation, but they were solely focused on the victims that were showing up all over the nation from Toledo. And they kept saying, why Toledo? So then they started investigating the Toledo area, and in that article, we found that there were 151 survivors. You know, they were saved. About 75 plus were from Toledo, and 45 of that 151 were children, one as young as 12. And so our community was shocked into action. We met in a room about half this size, and it was wall-to-wall people wanting to know, how did that happen to our community and to our children? Why are they being, in my mind, harvested to be sold, to be raped? Because that's what human trafficking is. Commercial sexual trafficking is selling rape. And when I discovered in the law that it was just a misdemeanor and that they were arresting the victims and letting go the pimp and the John, I felt a gut-wrenching injustice, the same as John felt about the Innocence Project, which is why I'm joining him, because we have this bond that we've been able to take a hold of and do something about. And so I was a senator at the time. I was in the super minority. I'm still in the super minority. But I could hear and imagine those cries in the dark, quiet spaces of the victims crying out to God. I literally almost heard those cries, and it drove me to do something, no matter what. I had to do something. So that catapulted me into 6 years of going anywhere in Ohio, especially Dayton, and find through education and advocacy groups of people, grassroots, who wanted to do something about it once they learned what this was. And what we knew growing up was prostitution is the oldest profession in the world, and then everyone would snicker. No, prostitution is the oldest oppression in the world and always has been. And so we termed it human trafficking. And once we did that, law enforcement in the justice system and the laws in a huge organization, Polaris Project plus Shared Hope, it's two national organizations, started organizing all 50 states to begin with step one, making human trafficking a standalone felony. It took me 6 years to get Ohio to do that, and the prosecutors were against me. So, I mean, you really see that, you know, we have a system of laws, but not all the laws are just. So you really can't say the justice system, right? That's what I learned, and I'm trained as a preschool teacher. You know, I taught kindergarten, my first professional job. But I think, you know, through that education and advocacy, when we learn how this is happening in our own backyards and it's walking down the street, we need to have eyes to see. We need to become educated, advocating, and the first lessons that I learned came from Elsandra De Romano, a survivor who's been speaking with us in Toledo. She took me in the back alleys in the streets of Toledo and showed me how and why it was happening. There are no streetlights in the poverty war zones, which our public utilities are responsible for providing, and city council and mayors. When I'm lieutenant governor, we are going to fix those dark alleys.
Teach.
Okay?
Teach.
Because that's where crime happens. So I learned these things. I learned these from the survivors, from the victims, from people who've had to suffer through an unjust justice system. And we need to learn from them as elected officials and do something about it. So I've learned now 17 years how to get the job done. It's been a pure miracle, by the way. I got nuns praying. That's another one of my secret weapons, the nuns. So anyway, it's really started with that horrific, inhumane human rights violation that we cannot say that we are worth any salt in our community if it's happening in our own backyard and we don't do anything about it. We have a huge problem with child abuse. It happens all the time. We need to teach our children what it looks like and yell and tell. It's okay to yell and tell if someone's abusing you. But it needs to happen comprehensively through the K-12 system and also with human trafficking, because the pimps know exactly where our weaknesses are, especially with the foster care system. 60% of the victims of human trafficking come through that highway. The pimps know we don't care because it looks like we don't care. And those children are broken, but they need to be saved, and they need to be nurtured, and they need bookends. So we're learning these things from the survivors who teach us how we need to make our laws just. And so, Barbara is my mentor in this work. And I learn everything that I need to know from the survivors, and then we need to create that movement. So long answer to your short question.
No, I just wrote that down, and I'm circling it, and I'm underlining it, and I don't think I'll ever say this the same. Human trafficking is selling rape.
It took me 6 years to break that down to my colleagues because most of them are men.
Yeah.
And I first heard it's a rite of passage. Boys will be boys, and it's just a Toledo problem.
Phew.
So, but you have to break it down. And I think that's what we're able to do by listening to the survivors and the folks, because there's so many women serving jail time for men's crimes right now. Yeah. And then we're expunging records. We're getting our third phase of expunging records so that women and even boys can get their driver's license, they can get housing, they can go to school, they can get their children back, they can get a job.
Because I got it all.
Get a job. Yes. So, they're amazing people. Barbara wears 2 super capes on her back. Do you see? Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and push the envelope. In the United Methodist Church, there is an approaching schism around LGBTQIA issues. And in relationship to that, I have found myself in the minority, particularly in the African American community, because we are a full-throated space of inclusion. For me, all means all. And yet, when you're doing your research, you've worked hard to make sure that human trafficking is a standalone felony. The research shows that there is a skyrocketing. Boys are now a part of this space. And the untapped trauma that boys and now men have to live through because no one wants to tell, the yell and tell, how that impacts them now disproportionately. What do you attribute to the rise in the trends of seeing more boys involved in human trafficking?
Well, I think it's always been there.
Yep.
It's always been there. But I think the technology through internet, people feel like, they can hide behind that screen and do whatever they want, whenever they want. So I think that is a growing issue. And we need more laws for investigators to crack down on that. See, John and I want to create these laws that other states are doing that we are not, so that we can prevent this and protect people and children from doing this. So, of course, the prosecution, you want to raise the penalties, but we have to do more in prevention and protection for children who are born today so that it doesn't happen to them, because we're not combating it and we're really not getting anywhere with it.
Can I say something on that LGBTQ?
Has anyone ever stopped you from saying anything?
No.
Okay, I'm just.
Go,
I'm just
Barbara.
checking.
Go, Barbara.
Go for it.
What I have realized working with the population of the LGBTQ is that they're more formed into getting into human trafficking, first of all, because it's an acceptable thing for sex trafficking. It's a way of them feeling placed, belonging, accepted, more engaged relationships. It helps them to deal with the trauma. It's a way of them covering it up. And then another thing is that I have been working with one that is so hard to be in the job industry because of the judgment. And so, and I'm talking about where they go through like 7, 8, 9 jobs. So where they're like, okay, you know what? You know, and then on the other end, they're getting that invitation. You know, I got this money for you, you know, come and get this money, or, you know. And so I'm like, you know, that's where the lines have been crossed with these young boys now getting into human trafficking.
I don't think that people really understand that in the midst of the constant need for both fundraising, constant need for placing TV ads and being at the right place, what it means for a place like Dayton to experience the breadth and depth of your wisdom and your witness. We are appreciative of you being here in the Gem City today, and we want to use this as an opportunity if there are any questions from the floor. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask these moral giants that sit before us? Go for it.
So in regard to prosecution of the rapist, how does the statute of limitations come into play with so many young people being victims of that industry? So how does that play into prosecution?
And can you do me a favor, because we don't have mics right in front of you? I'm motioning upstairs. And then we'll get that, make sure that that's heard both in our broadcast. You're okay, just repeat the question one more time.
So it may not have been as clear as I'd like, but I want to ask how, I know the statute of limitations, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I'm no longer Catholic, and, you know, in regard to priests who are pedophiles, and the statute of limitations came into play quite a bit in regard to young people often being the victims in the Catholic Church as well as in the industry. Is that how does the statute of limitations come into play in regard to prosecution of rapists?
Well, they're very specific based on the experience, but I do know that we have expanding statute of limitations and bills in Ohio, and that needs to happen. So each case is different, but yes, the statute of limitations in Ohio is limited.
So how do you, if you're successful at your campaign, and I'm behind you, is that, what are you guys going to do?
Make it a priority.
What are you going to do about the statute of limitations?
Make it a priority.
Try to expand or eliminate the statute of limitations. Pass legislation to either expand or eliminate the statute of limitations for rape.
Excellent question. Thank you. Excellent question. Are there any more questions? By all means.
Sir, I'd like to ask you, I mean, Bar, I'm about to turn 70, and my remembering names is not my strength.
It's okay.
Is that I would ask both of you, it sounds like it's real clear about how you give back to the community and how you're working to try to help young people be aware, and of older people as well, of this issue. But I'd like to ask you, sir, how do you feed back into the community in regard to your experience? How do you influence young people in regard to what happened to you?
Well, We go into schools, colleges and universities and speak and tell our story, pass the word on about the Innocent Project, how people can get involved with supporting the Innocent Project. We also get together and go to courts when someone is being exonerated and freed and show support for our fellow or female exoneree and their family. That's really huge. For somebody to be there when you get out of prison for doing years, and you got people that's coming there to see you, that's been through the same thing you're going through, it's powerful. So it's just our way of giving back, you know. It's like it's work for us. I believe that you get a certain age, you have to find something that feeds your soul, feeds your heart, that you don't necessarily care about getting paid for. You know, it's just what we do. Thank you.
Any more questions?
God,
Just tell us your name and where you're from too when you're asking the question.
Good afternoon. My name is Yusuf El Zain. I'm from Dayton, Ohio. Good to see you, Mayor, Senator, and of course the two maybe that made this event helpful for me to be here, because I understand my problems are nothing compared to both of you. But knowing how strong you are now, you must have gone through some difficulties, especially with mental health. And knowing how much this is becoming a taboo for some reason, that we cannot talk about mental health, what is it that was available for you back then, and what is it that is not available for you now that the mayor can help us get as to become available for people that needs it the most?
I would say one of the things is just bridging a gap, first of all, and it's probably one of the hierarchies is the insurance. And one of that is because a lot of people are not able to get the resources that they need because no insurance. So, you know, like I'm a counselor, I'm a case manager, I'm a peer recovery supporter, I'm a court advocate, I'm a housing advocate. They don't pay me for it, but you know, I wear all the hats because I know what it's gonna take for a person to get on the right path in life. For me, mental health, I still deal with mental health. You know, I deal with paranoia, you know, I deal with anxiety, you know, PTSD, you know, I still deal with, I have to tell my husband all the time, like, you know where I came from. Like, you know, you better know how to treat me. I mean, you know, because I'm delicate, you know, but at the same time, I do what I need to do and I have a counselor. You know, I still have to use a counselor. You know, I have to talk about my stuff no matter how crazy it might sound. You know, I have trust issues. You know, I'm not afraid to say that, you know, because I was never able to trust men. You know, so that's something that, you know, that really bothers me, you know, but, you know, at the same time, I don't see what they can do too. But I'm saying those are some of the things, you know, that's being suffered from. But to make sure that insurance is really affordable, because these people out here that are really sick, and sometimes when you talk about those that are doing rapes, those that are doing violence and stuff like that, you know, maybe they wasn't able to afford, you know, the insurance or, you know, and I'm serious, like, it's real. Like, it's real. Like, I have someone calling me on the phone, like, come and get me help, like, you know, and I can't really get the help that they need because the insurance.
I'd like to add to that, if I may. Everything that you've gone through, we exonerees go through the same thing in terms of when we get out of prison. Actually, if you get out of prison with parole, you have more opportunities that you're exposed to in terms of housing, food stamps, mental health, everything. All of that is available to you on parole. Mm-hmm. When you are exonerated, they just open the door and say, see you.
Cheech.
You have nothing. But the Innocent Project has provided these outlets for us. I mean, they wear a lot of hats too. Dr. Phil, Oprah, Jerry Springer. No, not Jerry Springer. Anyway, they have afforded us things that people don't normally do. You know, a lot of us come out with PTSD and all kinds of issues and things like that. And the Innocent Project has helped us in a lot of ways. The other Innocent Projects in other states don't do what they do here in Ohio. And what I want to ask you guys is there anything that you guys can do when you're elected in regards to some type of programs for exonerees when they get out that could help them with mental health, housing, employment, stuff like that?
Great question.
You can be sure that I would like you and Dean and others to write that program for us, and we will fund it. And Yusuf, mental health is a huge crisis, which has only gotten worse because of COVID. A lot of people stuck at home, a lot of people suffering, a lot of children who are out of school, who are going to need additional services. Teresa and I are going to expand mental health services throughout the state. First of all, we can, through the Department of Insurance, require primary parity for mental health services for primary care, and I intend to appoint a director of insurance who will require it to be part of the basic package, number one. Number two is, I think there are a need and the ability to dramatically expand federally qualified health centers throughout the state. FQHCs, the way they're known by their acronym, and these are community-based healthcare centers that are funded by Obamacare. We send more money to Washington than we get back in return. But when we open up FQHCs, we get some of those federal dollars back to Ohio. There are 88 counties in Ohio. 47 don't have a single primary care federally qualified health center. Obamacare pays through Medicaid expansion for mental health services and for addiction services, like opiate addiction services, Suboxone prescriptions, which is critical to stopping the cravings for heroin and things like that. Teresa and I are promising to get an FQHC into every county in the state in 8 years during our 2 terms as governor and lieutenant governor. And in addition, there are some large urban counties where you still have underserved medical communities that are even in the same county. So we'll at least get one to every county, and then we'll add some to the big urban counties where you have sort of medical deserts, like food deserts.
Okay. How can youth get involved in how can youth get involved in preventing sex trafficking, human trafficking?
Well, I'm just going to example off of my godfather, Cornelius McGrady. He started a coalition with the Reynoldsburg Youth Human Trafficking. So I would say get with your schools, and it's something that you ladies can even start yourself. Like
Absolutely.
Go to your principal or whoever it is, in your school, and say that you want to start a youth coalition, and do some things after school, and some of the awarenesses of what's going on with some of the students in there are going to come about, So also you can get in touch with me. After this, I'll give you my number, and if, my godfather can even, give his ear to you to tell you how to reprimand that, how to get that started.
There are coalitions all over the state of Ohio now. When we started 17 years ago, there were only 2. So every geographic area in Ohio has a human trafficking coalition. But I'd love for Councilman McGrady to talk a little bit about what his kids do.
Yes.
He's coming. Yeah.
Go for it.
Good afternoon. First of all,
It's
my
amazing.
name is Cornelius McGrady, and I'm honored to be here, and I love running my mouth, especially when I'm talking about our youth. Coming back from Iraq in 2000, let me give you the forefront, then I'll cut across the field, as my pastor would say, my bishop would say. I started in 2008 when I came back from Iraq after my 3rd tour. I was a sexual assault response coordinator over there. I performed those duties over there, seen some things. Luckily, I didn't see any heinous things. So after coming back here, I retired from the state of Ohio, and then I said I have extra time on my hands. So let me look in the civilian side of the house and see how sex trafficking is going on in the city, in Ohio. Was I shocked? Like Senator Fetter said, the first thing that popped up was Toledo, Ohio. In 2009, I attended a child trafficking conference. So since 2009, I've been running with it ever since. So I said, well, let me take a look at it and see what's going on in the communities near me. So then I started seeing the yellow markers on the state of Ohio. If you go to Shared Hope International and pull up their map for where human trafficking calls and busts have taken place, and then pull up Ohio, you'll see all the dots. The majority of them in your large cities. So I've been running ever since with it, and I got tired of just talking and talking. Well, understand it was in the infancy, but human traffic, when I first learned about it and started researching it, it just gravitated to me to the point where here I am, a 3-tour combat veteran, and I'm looking all around, my head's on a swivel. How am I missing this? I was horrified. So I started within my community because no one was saying anything, and then when I was on council, they said I was just doing it for hyperbole. So we got in a little tug-of-war, tongue-in-cheek conversation on open mic that how dare you attempt to assault me to think that I would use our youth for my own satisfaction. That just put more fuel to the fire. So today, we have various highs, very few lows, numerous recognitions. In 2015, we were recognized as the first after-school youth group to receive the Ohio Liberators Award. That's an organization established by another survivor. It's Reynoldsburg Youth Human Trafficking Coalition, focused on the domestic violence cycle with the emphasis on missing children and human trafficking. Because when you look at the domestic cycle violence, like I was just telling Barbara today, I've been looking for the document to show the correlation between the domestic violence cycle and human trafficking, and I just jumped for joy. I said, baby, I found it. I said, this is the document I've been looking for years to show the correlation between domestic violence and sex trafficking. The violence remains the same between the two entities, domestic violence, and then the violence that the survivor, the ladies of the street, if you will, endure. And in the words of the old gospel, just moving on.
Human trafficking is domestic violence on steroids.
Yes.
It's the extreme domestic violence. It took 5 years for the Domestic Violence Network in Ohio to recognize that. So the education and advocacy needs to go deep and wide in your communities, in churches, and especially the youth, because that's where we're going to combat it. When the youth no longer participate and they're aware they can save each other, and it will no longer be a practice.
I have one commercial. Now, we've been doing this, and a matter of fact, when I met Barbara, I said, wherever I go, I'm taking you with me. And I've been dragging her, and she's been dragging me for the last 13 years. I just moved into a new community. I'm in Pickerington now. So the library in Reynoldsburg is closed, so we're operating under the library, within the library of Pickerington. So I was invited to sit at a PTO. Make a long story short, I'm remapping everything. That's not the word I want to know. I'm talking too fast. But I'm recharging everything because they have a new program they're going to implement in the school systems next year for individuals They have 15 entities there. If a child is short on some credits, and if they can show 40 credits, involvement, community service credits in here, which we fall under. Make a long story short, I'm rebranding. Matter of fact, I was looking for credentialing my program now, so I'm putting it in another school district as we speak right now. Isn't God good? Talk to me. Tell
Amen.
me about it. Amen. Yeah.
I have a question. I have my own question. And this is for Mckinley, and this is for Senator. One of the barriers that has been for someone as myself, a survivor of human trafficking, is that I'm not this big. I'm big in myself with my name, Barbara Freeman, but I'm not big in my nonprofit. You know, it's not a big, like we have in Columbus, we have Alva's House, we have Eden, we have Amethyst, we have, you know. So someone like myself that knows the work that needs to be done, that is doing the work that needs to be done, but doesn't get the funding, doesn't get the grants, doesn't get that because we have all these big, you know. And it's affecting because I have good numbers in my house that comes from my house that graduate, they buying houses, they buying cars, education, they going back to school, like, you know. The work is being done, but ever since my house has been, and I want to thank, this is my mama, Teresa Fetter, because she's the one that put the paint on the walls. You know, she's the one that came down because wasn't nobody hearing me. You know, wasn't nobody hearing me when I'm saying, I got this house over here that's been donated, you know, da-da-da-da-da. And nobody was hearing me, but she did. You know, and she brought the union workers, she put the paint on the wall. And then Councilman McGrady had me to come to one of his events. And a lady just said, I'm giving you this grant. I'm just going to give it to you because you deserve it. And so that helped the house to be remodeled, you know, which is beautiful. And we had a community day, and, you know, Councilman McGrady came out, and it's on Channel 10 News. You can watch it. But the thing about it is helping a house to run. It's a challenge for me, you know, because, you know, there's no potential funders and different things like that. It's the church community that has came behind me, that has believed in me. So somebody like me, as a human trafficking survivor, needs that support. I put in for the grants, don't get the grants, you know? And I think it's because it's these big, you know, and they're not looking down low, you know, at those that are really out here on the streets paving the way. So I want to know how that can be put into change.
Well, grants have specific provisions and markers. So, just like the housing, there were only 100 beds in America 17 years ago for trafficking victim. In America, 100. And there isn't much more now. So we need to level the playing field and look at where the community need is being met and where it needs to be. Safe houses. We need drop-in centers. You know, there's an on-ramp to recovery, and that hasn't been defined yet. So many of the survivors that are doing the work, and they're credible because the other survivors trust them. They don't trust government. They don't trust usually the professionals who have all the PhD and all the, collegial letters behind them. We need to do the transition that makes sense so that we're building bridges. So I think that is a need for Ohio, and I think across America, where we're able to transition the types of help that's being laid out, because we've never done this before. We've never rescued like this before. We just swept it under the rug, and some didn't make it, some did. Some are successful, and do have PhD and doctorate behind them, but they lived that life and they figured out how to survive. So, you know, as a community and as elected officials, we should be aware of what's going on and step into the trenches with the people who are doing the work to find out how we can help assist and be the bookends that they need, because we're saving. We are actually saving. Barbara was saved. And if we didn't have Barbara, there are a whole lot of women and boys I know who would not be here if it weren't for her. And Judge Herbert, who saw the need for that court docket. And so we need to just continue to be aware, educate ourselves, and put a plan forward and keep talking to the people who are affected. The survivors and the thrivers teach us. We don't know. We learn. We're just able to have the power in the community through a democracy that will help us spend the money where it needs to be.
Well, I'm going to say this just real fast, because I'm not asking for anything that I won't work hard for. You know, I work very hard. I work three jobs right now, and I run two nonprofit organizations. So basically what I'm seeing is the thing of the housing. And I feel and I know that it needs to be gated communities for survivors, you know? And I'm looking at all the abandos and everything that we have and all of this money, and I think that some of it needs to be placed in fixing up those so that we can have more places for survivors to go, because I have a list of 20 ladies right now, and I only have 4 beds. You know? So those 20 that's waiting, are they waiting to die or are they waiting to get saved? Because there's no place to put them.
Powerful. Powerful. We've got one last question from the floor. We've got a question from the Mississippi Delta online, and then our candidate, Mayor John, will lead us out. Please, don't forget to introduce yourself, brother.
My name is Richard Horton. I was just released from prison after serving almost 17 years for a crime that I didn't commit. First of all, I'd like to thank God while I'm here in the church. Second of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Cranley for the work that he's done. I'm proof that the mission that he's pushing, the agenda that he's pushing, that it works. And I'd like to ask you, Mr. Cranley, I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and what kind of scares me as coming home recently is the rate of the violence. And as I understand, you was the mayor of Cincinnati, and you was able to bring some of the violence, some of the numbers down. And I want to know what you will do for the people of the capital city. How can you get those numbers down?
How to bring the violence down?
Yes, sir.
Thanks for sharing your experience, and congratulations to you. Yes, so Cincinnati has seen over many years a decline in shootings. Now, 2020 was a bad year, like it was across the country, and we had a spike in shootings as well. And so that was a bad blip for us on the otherwise a trajectory. But then in 2021, it started coming back down again. And we were one of the only major cities in America where shootings were down last year, not up. But let me start by saying that the shootings are still way too high in Cincinnati and everywhere across this country. There's an epidemic, a public health crisis of gun violence in this country. Fundamentally, you've got to do 2 things at once. One, have smarter policing. We had 20 years of reforms that I helped to usher in Cincinnati, and those involved use of force changes, so you don't use a baton if you can use a taser. You don't use a gun when you can use a taser. Mental health training, substance abuse training, and teaching officers how to de-escalate situations rather than escalate situations. Second is transparency and accountability, which I already talked about with body cameras and things like that. But the third piece is the piece that often doesn't get talked about in America anymore. and it needs to be, which is what are officers supposed to do? We've had a national conversation long overdue about what officers should not do. Killed George Floyd, right? They shouldn't do that. But in high crime neighborhoods, people want police, and we have to re-educate police on what it is we want them to do, because we have way too many shootings and homicides in our cities. And so what we have done in Cincinnati, which I think can be and should be expanded across to other cities, is focus on guns and focus on gun violence. I always tell the story that, most police officers are good people, and most police officers believe that they're in public service. And they view themselves kind of like Batman. Their job is just to stop crime. And so you could have three situations. You could have a young man walking home from the library, but breaking curfew to get home, go to sleep, but technically breaking the law. You could have a young man smoking marijuana in a park. And then you could have a man who's responsible for multiple shootings. Now, most cops come out of the academy and they think that you should arrest all three. And then just see whatever happens. They know that the murderer is going to get more of a punishment than someone else, but the first two people might end up with a record that keeps them from getting jobs and opportunities and all kinds of other problems. And the reality is that we don't want either of those first two examples to end up with a criminal record. The kid who's walking home from the library isn't doing anything wrong. And depending on how old the person is and whether marijuana is legal or not, I think it should be legal, but for over 21 years old, it should be put out and the person should be moved along, if they're breaking the law, but they shouldn't go to prison for that. They shouldn't go to jail. They shouldn't get a record for that. And so we've tried imperfectly, but somewhat successfully, to shift people and our police officers to focus exclusively on the third case. And what we find in a lot of high crime neighborhoods is that if you arrest a shooter, they know who the shooters are. And if you arrest the shooters, the cops will be the heroes of the neighborhood. But if you arrest a kid walking home from a library, you're going to be the GOAT, right? And then that cultural change reinforces itself, so that the more times you take out the shooter and stop arresting the curfew and the pot smoker, the more the community will share information with you and trust you that you're in there to get the true bad guys and not go after, ticky-tack stuff that ends up ruining people's lives. So those have been some of the things that we have done to bring down the violence. I think at a broader level, it's important to advance social justice, economic uplift. Cincinnati has seen the fastest reduction in poverty in the last 10 years, which is related to the fact that we did a $15 living wage. We expanded dramatic, services for homeless, as well as for job training. We've invested heavily in public transportation and preschool. And so we've done a number of other things that have lifted up the economic conditions, which I think also has, it's not a perfect match, but an impact on crime.
There's a question online from Mississippi that has been so moved by the Innocence Project. They say, how do they begin to move the needle and think about starting something similar where they are?
In Mississippi?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know off the top of my head if Mississippi may already have a chapter. They don't. So there's two things that can happen. One, in the meantime, before you have your own chapter of the Innocence Project, the New York City Cardozo Law School, which is a massive organization, wonderful organization, they tend to fill in the gaps around the country where there's no Innocence Project. And so you can, if you have a case that you want looked into, you can try to get the attention of the Cardozo Law School Innocence Project based in New York City. But the best thing would be to start your own Innocence Project. And most of them, not all of them, but most of them are started at law schools, where you have the ability of students to get credit on the cases It's, very cheap to use students for credit instead of paying a bunch of people. Mark and I were the only employees when it started. We have, I think, 5 total now, but most of the work, initial work, is done by students basically for free. And so I'm not familiar off the top of my head with the law schools in Mississippi, but I would probably try to find one of those schools that has a law school to see if they'd be willing to run with it. Dean?
Okay, go for it, my friend.
Yeah, I just want to expand on what Mr. Cranley's done. The Ohio Innocence Project started in 2003 officially. We released 34 people, served over 725 years in prison for crimes they did not commit. Richard Horton is the 34th person, been out a couple months so far. Nationwide, 3,036 people have been exonerated in the United States since 1989. They served over 26,700 years for crimes they did not commit. That's 26,000 years for crimes they did not commit. So this is just a blip in the iceberg of what needs to be done. But Mr. Cranley has definitely helped develop a program that's one of the top innocence projects in the United States and the world. And I greatly appreciate what he's done.
We thank you for you. Let the record show that John held you in church longer than the preacher did today. As we move to close, we are again thankful for you all who are watching. We ask that you would get on Facebook or YouTube and share this with your friends, because there's a lot of pertinent and powerful information. We know the Oscars tonight, but the real stars are right before us here. And so as we close out, John, do you have any last words you'd like to offer up?
Look, the election's 5 weeks from Tuesday. If you're inspired to support us, please vote for us. Tell people to vote for us. If you have the ability, contribute to us, johncranley.com. And thank you for spending your Sunday with us.
Be safe.